The Maple Leafs' search for help down the middle is starting to feel like one of the biggest priorities of this entire offseason, and after looking at all the available options, it's easy to understand why. Toronto has Austin Matthews and John Tavares under contract, but beyond them, there are still plenty of questions, and expecting young players to immediately fill those roles would be asking for a lot. That's why the front office has been evaluating every possible free agent center, even if this year's market isn't exactly loaded with game-changing talent. The reality is that there isn't an obvious top 6 solution available in free agency, which makes this a much more complicated situation than simply writing a big check. Players like Kevin Stanley and Teddy Blueger are viewed more as reliable checking centers who can help on the penalty kill and defensive zone faceoffs, while veterans such as Scott Laughton and Boone Jenner bring experience, but also come with contract concerns because of their age and projected salaries. Jason Dickinson would have been an intriguing defensive option, but he's already off the market, making the available choices even thinner. Looking at this group, I honestly think the biggest takeaway isn't necessarily who Toronto should sign, but what this says about the organization's strategy. If the Leafs want a legitimate top 6 center who can truly change the look of this lineup, they're probably going to have to find that player through the trade market rather than free agency. Bringing in one of these veterans could certainly improve the bottom 6 and take some defensive pressure off Matthews and Tavares, but none of them realistically solves the team's biggest need by themselves. That's exactly why this conversation becomes so interesting, because while Toronto was exploring these depth options, another rumor is starting to pick up serious momentum around the league, and this one has the potential to completely reshape the future of the franchise if it ever became reality. One thing that became crystal clear after looking at Toronto's offseason plans is that the front office knows standing still simply isn't an option anymore. After the disappointment of last season, the Maple Leafs are approaching free agency with one priority above everything else: finding legitimate help down the middle. The problem is that this year's center market just isn't very inspiring, and that's forcing the organization to think much more creatively than fans might have expected. Right now, Austin Matthews and John Tavares are the only established NHL centers under contract, and while Jacob Quillen remains part of the organization's plans, expecting him to immediately take on a heavy defensive role against some of the league's best centers would be asking far too much at this stage of his development. That's why Toronto isn't simply looking for another depth forward. They're trying to find players who can absorb difficult defensive assignments, win faceoffs, kill penalties, and allow Matthews and Tavares to spend more time creating offense instead of constantly starting shifts in their own zone. Several names have been discussed, including Kevin Stanley, Scott Laughton, Boone Jenner, Teddy Blueger, and Jason Dickinson before he came off the market, but each option comes with significant limitations. Some offer defensive reliability, but very little offense. Others bring leadership, but carry concerns about age, injuries, or contract value, and none of them truly looks like the kind of top 6 center capable of transforming Toronto's lineup. That's really the biggest takeaway here. Free agency may help fill one hole, but it probably won't solve the Leafs' biggest problem. As a fan, that's both encouraging and frustrating at the same time, because it's good to see the organization recognizing its weaknesses instead of pretending everything is fine. But it's also obvious that simply signing one of these available centers won't suddenly turn this team into a Stanley Cup contender. If the Maple Leafs want to make a genuine leap forward, the biggest move is almost certainly going to have to come through the trade market rather than free agency. And speaking of changes to the roster, another move has just happened involving Toronto's blue line, and even though it isn't the blockbuster everyone was expecting, it could say a lot about what John Chayka's front office is planning next. Another move that caught my attention is one that honestly makes a lot of sense for this organization. The Maple Leafs officially signed Troy Stecher to a 2-year contract worth just $1.35 million per season. And while this isn't the kind of signing that dominates headlines across the NHL, it's exactly the type of move good teams quietly make to improve their overall roster depth. Ever since Stecher arrived off waivers last season, he brought something this blue line desperately needed. He moved the puck well, played with energy every single night, competed hard, and quickly became one of those players that fans naturally enjoy rooting for because his effort never seemed to change regardless of the score or the situation. During his first stretch with Toronto, he produced offensively, handled difficult matchups alongside Jake McCabe, and proved he could contribute far more than many people expected. What I also find interesting is the timing of this extension. Brandon Carlo is already gone, Emile Andre has received a qualifying offer, and now Stecher is officially staying, which tells me the front office is trying to reshape this defense with players who fit the identity they want instead of simply paying for reputation. At this price, there is very little downside because Stecher gives Toronto an experienced right-shot defenseman who can step into the lineup whenever injuries happen. And considering that most of this defensive group is now over 30 years old, chances are he will end up playing a significant number of games anyway. I also think there is something valuable that doesn't always show up on the stat sheet. Stecher embraced playing in Toronto, never hid from the media, always answered tough questions, and showed genuine passion for wearing the Maple Leafs jersey. In a market where players are constantly under pressure, having veterans who actually connect with the fan base matters more than people realize, and that kind of culture can become just as important as any depth signing over the course of a long season. When you connect this news with everything we discussed earlier about Toronto searching aggressively for center help, a very clear picture starts to emerge. The Maple Leafs aren't making one dramatic move and calling it an offseason. They're trying to improve the roster piece by piece, strengthening weak areas, adding reliable depth, and creating more flexibility before the season begins. Whether those additions come through free agency, trades, or affordable extensions like this one, the organization is clearly refusing to stand still after last year's disappointment. As a fan, I think this offseason feels decisive more than anything else. There are still plenty of questions that need to be answered, especially down the middle, but at least we're finally seeing a front office that appears willing to make difficult decisions instead of simply hoping the same group produces different results. Hopefully, these moves are just the beginning of something much bigger, because Leafs Nation has waited far too long to see this franchise take the next step. If you enjoyed today's update, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you like bringing Troy Stecher back? And what move do you think Toronto absolutely has to make before the season starts? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach our goal of 1,500 subscribers. Your support really helps us keep bringing Maple Leafs news every single day.